When the first king fell short, God sought another heart. The Lord does not see as humans see. The Lord searches the heart. The one chosen was not the one expected.
Called to serve, destined to rule. But a towering threat rose against Israel. Send me a man to fight me. While fear gripped every warrior, a shepherd moved forward. I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts. The faith of a shepherd, the fall of a giant. These were the days of King Saul, the first king anointed over Israel. Yet Saul had repeatedly turned away from God's commands, and although he still occupied the throne, the Lord had already removed his favor from him as king. The aged prophet Samuel, who had anointed Saul at God's instruction, grieved deeply for him. But God was preparing something new. He spoke to Samuel, saying,
How long will you grieve for Saul, since I have rejected him from ruling over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, for I have chosen a king from among his sons. Samuel was afraid and said, How can I go? If Saul hears of this, he will kill me. But the Lord gave him careful instructions to conceal the mission. Take a young heifer with you and say, I have come to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will reveal to you what you must do. You shall anoint the one I indicate to you. So Samuel obeyed the word of the Lord. He came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the city approached him in fear. They asked him, Do you come in peace? Samuel answered, Yes, in peace. I have come to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and join me for the sacrifice. Then Samuel consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Thus began the hidden search for Israel's future king. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, the firstborn, and thought to himself, Surely the Lord's anointed stands before him. But the Lord spoke to Samuel within his heart, Do not consider his appearance or his stature, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward form, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass before Samuel. But Samuel said, The Lord has not chosen this one either. Next Jesse brought Shammah forward, and Samuel said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. In this way, Jesse presented 7 of his sons before Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord has not selected any of these. Then Samuel, remembering that God had declared the king would come from Jesse's sons, asked, Are these all the sons you have?
And Jesse answered, There is still the youngest, but he is out caring for the sheep. But Samuel insisted, Send for him, for we will not sit down until he arrives.
So they sent for him and brought him in. He was healthy, with striking eyes and a pleasing appearance. Then the Lord said to Samuel, Rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. It was a prophetic act, a sign that God had set him apart for a future purpose, though neither David nor his family likely understood its full meaning at that moment. From that day forward, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David with power, and as God's Spirit rested upon David, it was slowly withdrawing from King Saul. Then Samuel rose and returned to Ramah. The seed of a new kingdom had been quietly planted in Bethlehem. While the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David after his anointing, the Scriptures tell us that the same Spirit had departed from King Saul because of his disobedience. In its place, a troubling spirit, permitted by God, began to afflict him. Saul experienced intense seasons of anguish, fear, jealousy, and uncontrollable rage.
The king of Israel was tormented deep within his soul.
Seeing the king's distress, his closest servants became concerned. They understood that this was a spiritual affliction. So they said to Saul, "Look, a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our Lord command his servants who stand before him to search for a man skilled in playing the harp. And when the troubling spirit from God comes upon you, he will play, and you will find relief." Saul approved of the suggestion and said, "Find me someone who plays well and bring him to me."
Then one of the servants spoke up. He knew of a young man in Bethlehem who was not only a musician, but possessed many remarkable qualities. The servant said, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the harp. He is courageous and strong, a capable warrior, prudent in speech and handsome. And most importantly, the Lord is with him."
David was still just a young shepherd, but his name was already spreading. And it wasn't just because of his skill, it was because of his character, his demeanor, his courage, and something that stood out above all. It seemed as if the presence of God rested upon him. Even before Goliath entered the scene, David's path was already reaching the palace gates.
One day, Saul sent word to Jesse. Jesse prepared provisions and gifts and sent David to the king. When David arrived, he presented himself before Saul, serene, respectful, firm. And then something unexpected happened. Saul became deeply fond of him. He not only kept him close, but placed him in a position of trust as a constant assistant, a shield-bearer, someone so close that he carried the king's weapons and saw firsthand the weight Saul carried. Because Saul waged wars that no one else saw.
At times, a dark oppression would seize Saul, an affliction that drained his strength, clouded his mind, and left the entire court in tension. And when this darkness came, David would take up the harp and play, not as a spectacle, but as a mission. And as the music filled the air, relief would arrive. Saul's breathing would calm, his mind would settle, the spiritual pressure would recede, and the inner turmoil would lose its power. David's hands on the strings would become more than just sound. They would become a path to peace. Thus David entered the king's service, but his story continued, strangely, hidden. Saul even asked Jesse to leave David with him permanently because the young man had found favor in the king's eyes. But David didn't become a man of the palace overnight. He went back and forth, the palace when need, the field when called. One day among nobles, the next among sheep. It was a time of silent preparation, humble service on the outside, but inwardly he carried a secret anointing for something far greater.
And while David's life was being shaped in silence, the war raged in broad daylight. The Philistines gathered again. Their armies advanced toward Judah and positioned themselves for battle. Saul and the men of Israel also camped in the valley of Elah, facing each other. Two armies, two sides, a tense stalemate with no one moving.
Then, from the midst of the Philistine ranks, a man stepped forward alone. Their champion, a warrior from Gath named Goliath. He didn't walk like an ordinary soldier. He moved like a menace, gigantic, imposing, nearly 3 meters tall. And it wasn't just size, it was weaponry, like a living fortress. Bronze helmet, bronze scale breastplate, heavy as a burden no ordinary man could bear. Leg guards, a spear in his back with a thick shaft like a beam, and an iron point weighing several pounds. And ahead of him came a man carrying a shield, because even Goliath's defense required help. Goliath stopped, faced the ranks of Israel, and shouted scornfully, "Why did you come out and take up your battle positions?" And the air grew heavy, because everyone understood what he was about to propose next.
Goliath's voice rolled across the valley like a drum of war. "Am I not a Philistine?" he shouted. "And aren't you the servants of Saul? Choose one man, send him down to face me." Then he laid out the terms with brutal simplicity. "If your champion fights and kills me, we will serve you. But if I defeat him and kill him, then you will serve us." And with a sneer that felt like a slap to the whole nation, he roared, "Today I openly insult the armies of Israel. Give me a man, and let's settle this." When Saul and the men of Israel heard it, courage drained out of the camp. Their faces fell, their hands shook. Fear took the place of strategy. And the humiliation didn't happen once. It happened again and again and again for 40 days. Every morning and every evening, the giant stepped out and repeated the same challenge, twice a day, like a ritual of intimidation. And Israel, an army trained for war, stood frozen, unwilling to move. No one answered, no one dared. While that valley echoed with mockery, life continued back in Bethlehem. Jesse called for David, who was still tending sheep, still living in the quiet places. He handed David supplies. "Take this roasted grain to your brothers," he said. "Bring these 10 loaves to the camp quickly, and take these 10 cheeses to their commander. Check on your brothers, find out how they're doing, bring back something, anything that proves they're safe." David rose early. He arranged care for the sheep, took the food, and set out exactly as his father instructed. When he reached the camp, the timing was almost cinematic. Israel's men were marching toward the battle line, shouting their war cry, loud voices trying to cover quiet terror. David found his brothers and began speaking with them, and while he was still there, Goliath stepped forward again. Same walk, same armor, same contempt, same defiant words thrown like stones across the valley. And David heard him. He watched what happened next. Seasoned soldiers turning away, backing up, fleeing from the sight of one man. The camp wasn't reacting like an army. It was reacting like a crowd. But David didn't respond with panic. He responded with fire. Not because he thought he was fearless by nature, but because he heard something in Goliath's speech that hit deeper than insults. To David, this wasn't just trash talk, it was blasphemy. It was a pagan challenging the honor of the living God. So David turned to the men standing nearby and asked, almost stunned, "What will be done for the man who strikes this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel?" Then he said the line that changed the entire story. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, this outsider, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The men answered him quickly. They described the king's promise, immense wealth, the king's daughter in marriage, and freedom from taxes for the victor's family. But before David could say much more, someone heard him. Eliab, David's oldest brother. And Eliab did not hear faith. He heard danger. He heard embarrassment, and anger flared in him. "Why are you even here?" Eliab snapped. "Who did you leave with those few sheep out in the wilderness? I know what this is. I know your pride. You came down to watch the fight." It wasn't just criticism. It was accusation. It was the kind of contempt that hits hardest because it comes from family. And David answered, short, controlled, refusing to explode.
because he wasn't there to argue with Eliab. He was there for something bigger. And what happens next is where a shepherd stops behaving like a messenger and starts moving like a chosen man.
David answered, almost in disbelief. "What have I done now? I only asked a question. Can't I even speak?" Eliab turned his face away, but David didn't get caught up in that discussion. He walked away and continued asking other people. It wasn't confusion, it was focus. And the more he spoke, the more one thing became evident to everyone. David wasn't afraid. He wasn't trying to show off. He was firm. Some men heard. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. Someone is saying they're going to confront him. And soon it reached Saul. The king summoned David. When David stood before Saul, he didn't beat around the bush. He stated clearly, "Let no one lose courage because of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul looked at him, young, without the appearance of a warrior, without a history of battle. "You can't go," Saul said. "You're just a boy. He's been a warrior since his youth." But David didn't react with emotion. He responded with testimony. "I used to tend my father's sheep," he explained. "When a predator appeared and took a lamb, I would go after it. I would attack and bring back what had been taken. And if it turned on me, I would hold it off and end the fight." Then David said something that changed the atmosphere. "Out there, I faced danger alone, and God delivered me." David looked Saul in the eye. "This Philistine will be like one of those threats because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the lion and the bear will also deliver me from this man." It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. And Saul, still cautious, still shaken, finally yielded. "Go," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." So Saul did what many people do when they see courage in a young person. He tried to transform David into a warrior. He put his own armor on him, a bronze helmet, heavy breastplate, and he even fastened a sword over David's tunic. David took a few steps, and it became clear immediately. That wasn't strength, it was a restraint. The weight pulled him down, the protection limited him. The king's equipment felt like a chain on a shepherd. David stopped and said simply and directly, "I can't walk with this. I haven't tested this." Then he took off the armor, not out of contempt, but because that wasn't what God had prepared for him, nor what he knew how to use. He chose confidence, not appearance. He took what was his staff in hand. He went to the stream and chose 5 smooth stones, small things that common people would ignore. He put them in his bag, and with his sling in hand, David walked toward the giant. Not with the weapons everyone expected, but with the tools he mastered, and with the God who had already been faithful when no one was watching. On the other side, the Philistine also advanced, closing the distance, with his shield-bearer in front. And now there was no more room for conversation, only for confrontation.
Goliath looked at David for real, and he scorned him. Not because David seemed dangerous, but because he didn't. To the giant, that young man was too small, too simple, too insignificant to deserve a worthy fight. It was as if David's presence was an affront. Goliath cursed, invoked his own gods, and shouted mockingly, as if the entire valley were a stage. "You come against me with a staff?" he taunted. "Come closer, I'll make an example of you." It was a clear attempt to crush David's courage before everyone. But David did not back down. He did not lower his eyes. He responded with something stronger than a shout. "You trust in weapons," David said firmly, "but I come in the name of the Lord, the God you are defying." And then David declared what no one expected to hear from a shepherd.
Today, everyone will see that there is a God in Israel. And they will understand something else, too. Victory doesn't depend on the size of the sword. This battle belongs to the Lord. For a moment, it seemed as if time slowed down. Then Goliath advanced to end it, and David did the opposite of what fear dictates. He ran toward the combat, without hesitation, without acting, just decisiveness. David put his hand in his bag, chose a stone, adjusted it in his sling, and launched it. He hit. Goliath fell, and the valley was in shock, because the impossible had just happened. David had won. Not with a sword in his hand, not with armor on his body, but with skill, speed, and faith. Afterward, David approached and took the giant's weapon, just to confirm the victory and end the threat once and for all, without prolonging the scene, without exaggeration, just the end of the danger. When the Philistines realized their champion had fallen, their courage broke. They turned and fled. And then Israel and Judah finally regained their voice. They rose with a shout and pursued the enemy, pushing them back and taking the camp. 40 days of humiliation were turned around by a single act of courage. David put away his weapons as a sign of what God had done. The shepherd who had been silently preparing was now at the center of a national victory. But that day didn't just create a hero. It opened a new chapter. The hearts of the people began to incline toward David. A friendship with Jonathan, Saul's son, would soon be born, deep, loyal, decisive. And behind the celebration, something dark began to grow, because David's victory didn't just inspire Israel, it threatened Saul, and that spark of fear would, in short order, turn into jealousy. And so ends the first chapter of David's story. A shepherd, young, unlikely, and chosen by God, faced a giant and left a lesson that remains relevant today. Faith in the Lord is not weak. It is stronger than fear, stronger than intimidation, stronger than any challenge that seems impossible. But David's victory was not the end. It was the beginning. From here, the journey becomes long, with deep friendships, dangerous persecutions, painful falls, difficult lessons, and above all, God's constant faithfulness guiding every step. This was just the first film in our series about the life of this remarkable biblical character. In the next episode, you will see David's fame spread, the bond with Jonathan, the king's son, born, and jealousy and fear consume Saul's heart, until David is forced to flee to save his own life. Don't miss the continuation. Thank you very much for watching until the end. If this story uplifted you, if David's faith inspired you, support the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs strengthening. To not miss the next films about David and other powerful stories from the Bible, subscribe now and activate the notification bell. And I want to hear from you. What impressed you most in this first part of David's journey? Write in the comments. Thank you for watching. May God bless you abundantly. Amen.